Hi there, I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our Friday live question and answer class. I host these classes every Friday at 12 o'clock Pacific Coast time, where I take your questions. I talk about a topic related to American accent, both pronunciation, intonation, many other topics, to help you improve your personal and professional communication in American English. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic which affects many people who are non-native speakers, and that is how your accent can affect grammar. So how we pronounce past tense verbs and plurals. And we're going to talk about the accent patterns that affect these two types of grammar forms, excuse me, what to watch out for, how to practice and correct errors you might be making. So welcome. I also teach here in Seattle. I have local classes and I teach worldwide with one-to-one training. You can find out more about that on my website, speechmodification.com. As we go through the class today, I'll be sharing resources with you, additional YouTube videos and lessons on my website that you can use to practice and try out the things that we're going to be talking about. So I'll put those links in the chat for you. If you're watching this class as a rebroadcast, you can also ask questions by putting them in the comments. I always do return to the videos and go through and answer people's questions, let you know where you can find the answers to your information, both on my YouTube channel and on speechmodification.com. Hi, nice to see you. Okay, so when we're talking about plurals and past tense verbs, so regular plurals where we add S and regular past tense verbs where we add ed, we actually have similar error patterns for both of these sounds, even though we're saying totally different sounds, the letter S and the letters ed. There's two things that affect both plurals and past tense verbs. First of all, anytime we have multiple consonants at the end of a word, it's called a consonant cluster, we can have errors. So words like ends, I have three consonants there in a row, the N, the D, and the Z sound, ends, or words. These are called consonant clusters when I have multiple consonants together. Or for past tense, words like moved, bagged. Even though there's a vowel letter between the V and the D, there's actually no vowel sound. Moved is two consonants together, and bagged is two consonants together. So one of the error patterns that I can have, well, I'll tell you about the error patterns in just a moment. So that's one similarity between plurals and past tense, that they have consonant clusters. And secondly, even though the spelling rules are consistent, that I add an S to make something plural for a regular plural, and that I add an ED to make something past tense, the pronunciation of the S and the ED is not consistent. There are rules, and I'm going to teach you those today, teach you how to know how to pronounce them. But in both cases, these letters can have three different pronunciations. And so, for example, the letter S, when I put that on to make something plural, it can say S as in hats and tops. It can say Z, and it actually usually says Z. That's the most common. So the letter S says Z for plurals in words like dogs and eyes. And the letter S can also say is in words like places and businesses. So three different pronunciations for plurals. Same for past tense, three different pronunciations for those letters ed. It can say the T sound, t, as in walked and stopped. It can say the D sound, and this is the most frequent, what it usually does, like we talked about in moved and bagged, just as a D sound. Or it can say id, like in needed and wanted. So how do we know which pronunciation to use? How does this work? It can be a little bit confusing. I'm going to go through those steps and give you that information and help you with that. Hi, nice to see everyone. Thanks for chiming in and saying hi. You can ask your questions as well. So how do I know how to pronounce it? If you want the simple answer, the most simple thing to know is that usually the letter S is going to say Z. Most of the time, on most plurals, when I add an S, it says Z. So if that's all you take away from this class, that I'm going to just mostly be having to say Z sounds for these words, then you've already learned something very important in pronouncing American English. But I can give you a little bit more information about how that works for the S. And then for the ED, most of the time it says D. So moved, bagged. ED almost always just says the D sound and not the id and not the T. The reason for both of these patterns, for plurals and for past tense, is that we match the voicing when we add those word endings. So what do I mean by that, matching the voicing? What I mean is that when I have a word, if it ends with a voiceless sound, for example, the word hat, is voiceless. My voice is not on, hat. Then when I add the S, hats. S is also voiceless. It stays voiceless, hat and hats. Versus when I have a voice sound, like a D sound, bed, when I add the S, it'll say a Z sound, bed and beds. Don't worry if you're a little confused about what that means, voiced and voiceless, if that's a new concept for you. I do have a lot of information that can help you with that. And I'm going to give you a specific video now that you can go to after class and take a look at all of the voiced and voiceless sounds. But we'll be talking about some specifics as we go through how this works for plurals and past tense. Celeste had a question, how to pronounce water. I do have a video for that on my YouTube channel. So if you go to Speech Modification Seattle and you go to the search box and type in water, you'll see actually several different videos for how to pronounce it. But what I'm going to tell you now is that what Americans will do for the word water is that rather than saying an aspirated T like T in water, that's more a British or Indian English style, water, we tend to say water. We use what's called a flap T on that T sound. It sounds pretty much like a light D. So I can think of it as being water, water, a light D, and then I'll have the correct pronunciation. Also watch out for that sound at the end of water. Make sure that you're not using an sound. You don't want it to sound like water. That's more, again, more British. We use a strong back American R, water. Good. You can get more help for those patterns in my video on how to pronounce water. Thank you for the question. And we have another question, which is how to pronounce, I'm not sure what your first word was there. Oh, new and the. So new, usually Americans will just pronounce that new with an N and an U. That's the IPA for that, new. Sometimes you will hear new with a little bit of a glide in there, new. That's more the British pronunciation. I would recommend going with this one, new, just the U vowel and the N sound, because that's more typical American. New, again, is more British, maybe a little bit on East Coast of the US. And the word the, I have a whole book, a free ebook you can get on my website, speechmodification.com, that walks you through how to pronounce the word the. But basically, you want to have a voice TH, th, and vowel schwa, the sound. So it really sounds like this in most cases, the. I do occasionally say the if the next word starts with a vowel, like the apple or the airport. But the majority of the time, I want that vowel schwa. I want it to sound like the. Good. I have several videos for that as well. You can go to my American TH playlist, or on my channel page, just type in the word the, and you can see all the videos teaching you how to say the, and then how to get that word the, that most commonly used word in English, into your everyday speech. My ebook is a great place to start with smart training techniques for pronouncing the word the, and also teaching you about how the patterns in that word apply in other words as well. Excuse me, at the end, I'll give you a link for that, and in the description for this video, you can get a link to the free ebook. You can download it right from my website, speechmodification.com. Okay, more questions. How do you pronounce where did and where do? Oh, do you pronounce where did and where do the same way when you say them in the phrase where'd? So no, I don't. When I'm saying where did, I would contract that to where'd you go? Where did you go becomes more like where'd you go? Oh, I see what you're saying. So when I say where do you go, that does have a similar sound. So where'd you go kind of has more of a j, where'd you go, versus where do you go, where do. I definitely link in both cases, where did and where do, but I really only contract to where'd you go. For where did you go? That's a pretty typical contraction. That's a great question. Thank you for that observation. And you're probably noticing that we do reduce both those phrases. So that's really good. You're very welcome. And we had a request for a video about the phonetic alphabet. Yes, I can definitely make a video outlining the IPA. In all of my videos for every sound of English, I do use the IPA symbols and talk about those and teach those to you. Particularly when I'm talking about vowel sounds, I find them useful. So you can find information about that on my vowel playlist and in all my videos about vowels. And then as well, I do have a video about pronouncing the alphabet in which I use the IPA. And then also use my playlist, the Sounds of English playlist. So on my channel page, if you go to the playlists and you scroll through, you'll find one called Sounds of English. And for each individual sound of English, I show you what the IPA is and what that sound is. And then, of course, how we spell it and common words with it. So great. Excuse me just a moment. I have a little bit of a cold. Actually, I'm getting over a cold, but my voice is not quite back to normal. So I apologize for that. All right. So great questions. Please feel free to keep answering them. I'm going to go back to our topic of plurals and past tense. I gave you the link for voiced and voiceless sounds. Another question we have here is, how do you pronounce I don't know? I don't know. So I don't know is another phrase that we use frequently and we do tend to reduce. And what we tend to do there is, if I'm saying it very slowly, I might say, I don't know. Typically though, I'm not really gonna aspirate that T. I'm gonna use a stop T, and I'm gonna say it more like this. I don't know, where my tongue goes up to make the T. I don't know, and then it releases right into the N of no. I don't know. In more casual speech, people will also tend to say more something like this, like I don't know, where the T is left out entirely. You can hear the difference there. I don't know. I do mark that T and make a stop, versus I don't know, is kind of more like I know. I would recommend this one for most formal and professional situations, and this one is perfectly fine for casual speech with friends. So you're welcome. Catherine has a question, which is, can you please pronounce the word listening in a slow way? So I will. Listening. Again, there's in that word, we pretty much don't say that T sound. I don't say listening. The T is silent. Listening. Let me know if that was slow enough or you need me to break that down a little bit further for you. All right, so let's look at some plurals. And what I'm going to do, rather than going through all of the voice sounds and voiceless sounds, I'm going to let you look at that video talking about that specifically, but I'm going to look at what happens in plurals specifically. And so when a word ends with one of these voiceless sounds, the p, the t, the k, or the f sound, those are all voiceless. My voice doesn't come on for any of those. Then when I add the S, it makes the S sound. Fairly simple. So for example, tops, cats, sticks, ifs, those S's for those plurals all say S. But when I have a voiced sound, so those are b, d, b, d, g, m, l, j, and all of the vowel sounds. Notice that we have to pay attention to the sound at the end of the word and not the letter. So I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. So there's only 4 sounds, right? That end up with that. Look at all these. Everything else, almost everything else, the S is going to say Z. So some examples: code, codes, bags, webs, rooms, eyes, winds, ears, calls. All of those have a Z sound. You might not have been aware of that because they're spelled with letter S. You might not be hearing that because your accent filter makes you think of it as being an S sound rather than a Z sound. But you can hear if I say it with an S, for example, my ice versus my eyes, you can hear that the first one is not correct. We do use a voiced sound on those. And then there's one other exception. There's a few sounds, the SH, CH, S, and Z sounds, where I can't just add an S or a Z very easily to those sounds. And so I have to add an extra syllable that sounds like is. So for example, I can't say wish and then add an S or a Z, wish, wishes. Well, I can say it, but it sounds weird. So we add that extra syllable. So wish, wishes, church, churches, judges, glasses, sneezes. So number 1, you may not have been aware that those need to be Z sounds rather than S sounds. Number 2, you are likely to have a pattern of devoicing those. So you might have been saying an S rather than a Z. And then secondly, anytime we have consonant clusters, a sound might be left off. And so you have to be careful to make sure that you're putting your S and your Z on so that when you're trying to say ends, it doesn't sound like end. That it's clearly that I'm saying the plural versus the non-plural. And this is where the grammar part comes in. If I have an error on that consonant cluster to make something plural, I'm devoicing or I'm leaving a sound off, it can sound like I'm using the singular noun rather than the plural noun. And I just have a pronunciation difference, but it sounds like I'm making a grammatical error. So that's something to pay attention to, and it's worth a little bit of practice on. At the end, I'm going to give you a quick tip and give you some resources for how to do that practice and how to pay attention to it. For right now, we're looking at the rules and looking at common words and noticing what that pattern is. Another question we have, let's see, do ought to and out of become homonyms when you reduce them? Such great questions today about these linking these reduced sounds in natural speech. So let me think about that for a minute. I ought to go. I ought to go, and it's out of here. It's out of here. Out of, oughta. No. So the first vowel is different. When I'm saying ought to, it's an aw vowel, oughta, and it does become flap T and a schwa. So oughta versus out of, oughta, oughta. Same end sounds, flap T and schwa, da. But the first vowel is ow, which is the diphthong going from ah to o. Oughta versus oughta. Now, in some places, that vowel distinction at the beginning, the aw versus ah, out, ow versus ought, oughta, and out of, oughta, might be a little bit difficult to hear, but they definitely don't merge to be just one sound. So good observation, good question. I hope I was clear on those vowels. Yeah, so starting with the original vowel for each one, hold on to that, and then the rest gets reduced into a flap and a schwa. So listening, it's okay, you can ask the same question. In listening, the schwa sound or just S? Listening, listen, listen. It has a very small schwa between the S and the N. Listening, listen, listen. If I say I'm just listen, or I'd like to listen, listen, it's kind of like a syllabic N where there's not much of a vowel there before it. Listening, listening. Oh, I see. Yeah, I guess we do both. So I will say listening or just listening, listening without that schwa, and both are acceptable. I Are you listening to it? Are you listening? Yeah, I think you can do either. We can reduce it all the way down to listening with no schwa, or you can put in the third syllable listening. I think when you were asking me to say it slowly, I would have a tendency to use all 3 syllables. In rapid speech, I'm listening to you, listening. I would reduce it down to 2 syllables and no schwa. Great question. Okay. Question about L's. Most sources say we only use light L's in the beginning of the word, but I can definitely hear some dark L's being used too. Look, large, laugh, lunch. So I think with the L sound that it really has to do with whether or not there's a schwa before the L. So when we're talking about words like pull or pool, where I have the L, in my mind, that's what defines a dark L. And if I'm saying look, large, I'm mispronouncing it. I really do need a light L, look, large, with no vowel before it and those initial L words. So that might have something to do with the way you're hearing English and who's pronouncing it around you. Now, there's variation among individuals, and it's possible that you're hearing some people use a dark L at the beginning, but I wouldn't recommend adopting that style. I think it sounds labored and not natural for American English. Okay, excuse me. Another question, how to pronounce quiz. Quiz is a word where the QU is not helpful for spelling, although QU in many, many words will actually be pronounced like this, with a K sound and a W sound, quiz. Quiz. So that's how you pronounce quiz. It has a K, a W, an I, and a Z, quiz. Just 1 syllable. Okay, so we talked about plurals and how the S can say either S, Z, or is. And then we briefly talked about the same thing with past tense, how ED can either say T, D, or id. And so it has the same patterns. Oh, I'm going to give you, before I move on from plurals, you can find more details about this, practice materials and lessons on my website. So here's the link for the lessons about plurals. You're very welcome, Rakesh. And that'll get you to lots of videos and resources for more details and practice information for plurals. So basically for past tense, it's the same rule. If I have a voiceless sound, so in this case, the P, the P, K, sh, s, ch, then my ED is going to say T. So for example, stopped, passed, looked, reached, wished. And that's because I'm already saying a voiceless sound at the end of that word, and it would be difficult to move my voice back on. So wished or looked is difficult and unnatural. So those are all a T sound. Wished, looked, etc., reached. And then that's less common. The most common is that the ED is going to just say a D sound. So this is true for all of the voiced sounds. Again, all of those voiced consonants and all of the vowel sounds. So for example, bagged, sneezed, judged, called, moved, smiled. Those are all D sounds. And then just like with the S, I can't always add a D or T sound to certain sounds. And that's true when a word ends with a D or T. So for example, wanted, needed, then my ED is actually 2 sounds, id, just like my is for the plurals. So most of the time, when you're making a word past tense by adding ED, you just want to add the D sound. The error you might have on this is that you might devoice that. So when you're trying to say moved, it might sound more like moved. Or you're trying to say wanted, it might sound more like wanted. So make sure that you learn about how to make voiced end sounds, and you can see that in my videos. And I also have a very specific video just about past tense and walking you through these steps. And you can find that on my website, as well as more lessons for how to pronounce past tense verbs, and a lot of examples of the most commonly used verbs and what they say at the end. Once you get used to this pattern, you get used to putting those voiced Z and D sounds at the end, you're going to have some success with changing this error and pronouncing them correctly. But again, you want to be careful that you pay attention to this, because you don't want it to sound like you're saying the word move when you're meaning to say the word moved, because it sounds like you're making a grammatical mistake, when really you just have an accent pattern or an accent error or pronunciation difference for those. So in just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick tip that you can use for practicing and working on these patterns that we've talked about today. But I want to give you a few announcements first. So first of all, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and then you'll be notified when I upload new videos and when I have live classes every Friday, and sometimes I have additional live classes as well. I'll be uploading a new video tomorrow going through plurals in more detail, and there are some videos already that you can find on plurals. And on my website, you can also go to my online courses where I talk about these topics and many other essential topics for improving your pronunciation and improving your accent. And you can get a free trial of my courses there. I suggest starting with my 6-week course, because it's a great way to get the fundamentals of the accent, pronunciation, intonation, everything you need to really improve. And I'll give you the link for that 6-week course. You can check it out. It's got a free trial, so it's a great way to just get a feeling for if online courses are right for you. Or if you prefer in-person courses, if you're here in the greater Seattle area, I have some new classes starting up in January, some 6-week courses that are in person. So I hope you'll be able to join me for one of those. And I'm also teaching a free workshop this coming, not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday, December 5th in Bellevue in the evening. So I hope you can come to that. You can see the calendar of all my classes and workshops on speechmodification.com. And that December 5th class, I will also be broadcasting over YouTube. So if you're not here in the area, you can still attend that class. Hopefully it'll be within the right time zone for you. It will be at 7 p.m. here on the West Coast, so it might be a little bit late for you, some of you and further east in the world. Catherine would like to hear me pronounce the word insecurity. So I'll say that for you, insecurity. If you have specific questions about the word, you can let me know. I'm noticing that it has the itty, the flap T towards the end, and the stress is on the third syllable, insecurity. So I want cure to be long, insa and E to be short, insecurity. Excuse me. Okay, my voice is almost running out, but our time is almost running out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick tip that you can use. When you're trying to practice for plurals and for past tense, you can try using a singular form and a plural form to test yourself, to see if you know what that S should say. So all you have to do for that is to look around you, and you can label what you see. So I can look and I can say desk, desks, that one has an S. Window, windows, that one has a Z. Light, lights, that one has an S. Door, doors, etc. It's a great way to kind of check your pronunciation, pay attention, start noting what those S's do. And I can do the same thing for practicing with past tense by doing a present tense verb and then a past tense verb. So for example, I talk, yesterday I talked, that one has a T. I live in Seattle. Last year I lived in Chicago, that one has a D. Today I call, yesterday I called, that one has a D. So it's a good way to kind of just practice on common words and phrases for both plurals and for past tense, and to pay attention to those patterns that we were looking at today. We have a question which is how to speak slowly. And I was just noting to myself how quickly I was speaking because I wanted to tell you a lot today. I would say that it's less important to speak slowly and more important to be trying to be clear and to use good intonation patterns. So oftentimes people are told, okay, speak more slowly, people will understand you better. And that is true, but you still want to sound natural when you're speaking. And so what I recommend, rather than trying to work too hard on slowing down, is that you pay more attention to which words are important. And so I can go rather quickly on the unstressed words as long as I'm stretching the stressed words. So did you hear I just said stretching? That one was long. I go quickly on the less important words and I hold the longer words longer. You can learn how to do this and learn more about patterns for intonation on my intonation playlist. That's a great place for that. And then the other thing I would recommend is start working on pronunciation patterns, because when you're trying to practice, trying to pronounce, the attention that you have to put on patterns, like if you're paying attention to plurals or to past tense, it will naturally slow you down because you're thinking about how you're saying the end of the word, and you can't do that. You can't speak as quickly if you're also doing that. One last thing I would suggest is that it's also really helpful to just use more pausing. So I can say one thought idea, then I have a pause, then I say the next thing. So even if I'm speaking quickly in my thought groups, if I have pauses in between, it gives my listeners time to process and catch up. Overall, speaking more slowly, if you're really working on that in particular, you can record yourself, listen, you can see how many words you're saying in a minute and see if you can go more slowly. You can tap along through the rhythm and try to kind of set a slower pace of your tapping. Those are some different techniques that you can try. Simon tells me to get well soon and have some honey. That's a good suggestion. I do have some tea and I'll have a hot honey drink later, and that will be good for my voice as well. I appreciate your suggestion. And I appreciate everyone being here today. All your questions and comments were great. I really encourage you to leave comments and questions on any of my videos, because I get my best ideas for what you need and what to create for you from your suggestions. This channel is here for you, to support you, to help you improve your American English, and so your contributions are very valued. Next week's class, we'll be meeting again Friday at the same time, 12 Pacific time, and we'll be talking about vowels, probably about 1 or 2 specific vowels. And I do have on my channel page a community poll. So we're coming up on our 500th video. That'll be sometime probably before the end of the year or in January, since we're at about 491 or 492 now. So I'm taking suggestions for what you might like to see for the 500th video. It might be a class like this. It might be the start of a new accent challenge series, or I'll take other suggestions. So if you have an idea for what we should do to celebrate getting to 500 videos, you can leave that in the comments here, or you can go to my channel page to the community and vote in our poll. Hi, nice to see you. You can watch the replay if you're just joining us now. Sorry we missed you today, but we'll be back again next week. And it's great to have everyone here in class. If you are new, welcome. And if you're a returning student, I'm happy to see you again. Remember that you can get lots of resources on my channel page on YouTube, as well as on Speech Modification, my website. I wanted to just show you that when you go to Speech Modification, oh, you were waiting for so long and then you missed me. I'm so sorry. Okay, so when you go to my website, Speech Modification, check out the free practice. That's where you're going to find a lot of resources. And you go to the online practice free trial, and then you can type into the search box. So for example, if you wanted to know more about what we were talking about today with plurals, you could type that in, and then all of the resources that have to do with plurals will come up for you, the various lessons and specific videos and other information. So this is the link to start if you're ready to take it a little further beyond our class. Okay, we have another question. How to be here for you to say the from in the, and that is challenging. And the is definitely a really challenging one, because my teeth, maybe where I accent pattern for my TH, and I have to move from and to the, and the. Just in many cases, Americans don't really say that D on the and, more like the, and the. And then you can use the same technique that I suggest for in the and on the, which is that when I just say in and on and, my tongue is going up behind my teeth, the tip of my tongue is. But when I say in the, you can see that my tongue is already in the T position when I'm saying, closing off for the N further back on my tongue. So rather than using the tip of my tongue to say in, I'm using this part of my tongue a little further back, in the, so that my tongue is forward enough to go right into the, in the. And that's called co-articulation. We use different shapes for our tongue to correctly make the different sounds when we have to say them together. So you might try, rather than trying to do and the, which is cumbersome and you've noticed doesn't flow very smoothly, try and the. The listener will still hear that D, or they'll still perceive it as long as you're staying on the N long enough. So, and the result is that it's easier and more fluent to move from N to TH. So hopefully that will have about this for in the and on the, and it would be the same thing for and the. So you can check that out. It's basically what I just described to you now, but it'll help you practice those. Go to my channel page or my website and type in the or on the, and you'll see those videos. That's a great observation, and I think you're correct. It can be quite a struggle to do that. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up for today, and I'll see you guys again next week. And thank you for being a part of class. Oh, we do have a good question. I'm glad you were here in time to ask your question, Robbie. How do you pronounce our house? Our house. So our is probably the trickier part of that phrase. Our house starts with the diphthong ow, which is the ah vowel, and the ow oo vowel, ow, our, and then it has an our. I think of it like this. Ow, like ow, I hurt myself. Our, and there's kind of a little bit of a W in between. Our. So I close off. Our house is just, again, that ow, how, that ow diphthong, and an S. House. Our house. So maybe for you that looking at that vowel ow might be helpful if that's what's giving you a problem for both of those, or it might be more moving from the ow to the our. Just slow down and stretch it out until it feels comfortable to glide between those vowels. Okay, so thank you so much again, everyone, for attending today and for your great questions. If you're watching the replay, please feel free to leave some questions in the comments and I'll get back to you with an answer. I'll see you next week at 12 o'clock for our class on vowels. And remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. speechmodification.com. You're welcome.